A little girl walked into the Millionaire CEO's office with a resume and one sentence that made him cry. It was the kind of morning where everything ran like a machine. Phones rang in rhythm, heels clicked across marble floors, and screens flickered with spreadsheets and data charts. At Blackstone Industries, one of the most powerful tech companies in America, the building itself felt like it breathed success. The lobby, designed with chrome and glass, buzzed with employees racing against deadlines, coffee in hand, Bluetooth devices in ears. Everyone had a place to be, except for one unexpected visitor. At the very top of the building, enclosed in a glass office that loomed like a throne above the world, sat Vincent Blackstone, a man of structure, power, and precision. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a symbol of control, a self-made billionaire who trusted data more than people and profit more than purpose. Emotions had no place in his world. Everything in his office, from the sharp leather chairs to the ticking gold clock, reflected his nature: cold, calculated, and precise. That morning he was reviewing the details of a high-stakes merger, eyes scanning numbers, mind buried in valuations and market forecasts. Every decision he made shaped the future of his empire. Nothing distracted him until his assistant, Maria, rushed into the office, her usual calm replaced by confusion. "Sir," she said, pausing as if unsure of her own words, "there's a little girl in the lobby." Vincent didn't look up. "A girl?" Maria nodded, still catching her breath. "Yes, she says she has an appointment with you. She has a resume." That word made him pause. He looked up, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "A resume?" "Yes, sir. Typed. Folded. She's holding it in both hands like it's important." Vincent leaned back, confused. "Who let her into the building?" Security tried to stop her, but she was calm. She kept saying, "I have something only Mr. Blackstone should hear." She wouldn't leave. For a moment, Vincent said nothing. A child, bold enough to walk into a corporate tower, ask for the CEO by name, and bring a resume? It was absurd. But something about the interruption intrigued him. Maybe it was the confidence, the nerve, or maybe it was because, for once, something unexpected had entered his perfectly ordered world. "Fine," he said. "Send her in." Maria hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, if she came all this way, she gets 5 minutes." Within moments, the door opened again, this time slower. In stepped a girl who couldn't have been more than 9 years old. She was small, thin, wearing faded jeans and a pink hoodie that looked 2 sizes too large. Her shoes were scuffed and her braids were slightly uneven, but her eyes were steady, calm, focused. She walked with quiet determination, clutching a folded sheet of paper in both hands. Her gaze didn't wander, didn't flinch. She walked straight up to Vincent's desk, placed the paper down gently, and looked at him. "My name is Hope," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, but it carried weight. Vincent looked at the paper, then at her. "Is this a joke?" She didn't laugh. "No, sir, it's my resume." He unfolded it. The paper was clean, the font large and clear. There were no fancy degrees or job titles. Instead it read, "Experience, dishwasher at Mama's Diner, unpaid, homework helper, night nurse to mom, after hospital visits. Dreamer of big things." Under references, it said, "Mom, the strongest person I know." Vincent stared at it, unsure what to say. It was absurd, and yet it wasn't. He looked back at the girl. "What do you want?" She stood still, fingers curling slightly at her sides. "Just one moment. One sentence. Only to you." There was something in her tone, not arrogance, but purpose. Vincent, who had shut down entire boardrooms with a glance, suddenly found himself listening. "Who sent you?" he asked again, more gently this time. "No one," she replied. "I'm here for my mom." That name echoed strangely in the room. "Your mom?" "She used to work here," the girl said. Vincent's face didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. "What department?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she took a breath. Her lip trembled just slightly, but her eyes stayed locked on his. I came to say one thing, just one sentence. It's important. Maria peeked in through the door, holding her tablet, whispering something about a press call. Vincent lifted a hand to silence her. His attention was now fully on the child in front of him. Go ahead, he said. Hope stepped forward slowly, her small hands clenched tightly. The room had gone so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. She opened her mouth to speak, and just as the first word formed on her lips, we end here. The office, bathed in soft morning light, had never felt so still. When the door opened again, Vincent half expected a security officer or a staff member to walk in with an apology, but instead it was her, that same little girl. No security, no escort, just Hope. She entered quietly, not with fear, but with the careful grace of someone who knew this moment mattered more than any other before it. Her steps were light but deliberate. Each one seemed to echo louder than the city below. Her jeans were old, faded in the knees, frayed at the cuffs. Her hoodie, a soft pink now worn by time and life, hung a little off one shoulder. One of the sleeves was rolled up, revealing a scraped elbow. The other was tugged nervously over her hand. She walked like someone who'd never had much, but never begged for anything either. In her hands, she carried a single sheet of paper, folded cleanly, precisely. It had no crease out of place. As she approached the desk, the air in the room seemed to change, like something invisible was waiting to unfold. Vincent looked at her, confused, and maybe a little intrigued. Who sent you? He asked again, his voice firm but no longer sharp. The girl stopped just in front of his massive desk, looked him in the eyes, and gently placed the folded paper on the dark wood between them. No one, she said softly. I'm here for my mom. Her words were simple but carried weight like stone. Vincent, still trying to make sense of it all, unfolded the paper with curious fingers. It was a resume, but not the kind he was used to reviewing, not the kind with MBA degrees or former executive titles. No, this was something else entirely. At the top, her name was typed in bold. Hope Daniels underneath. The heading read, Work Experience. The list was unlike anything he'd seen. Dishwasher at Mama's Diner, unpaid, homework helper, night nurse to mom after hospital trips, dreamer of big things. Vincent blinked. There were no job titles, no salaries, no companies, just roles, lived, not earned, experiences no child should ever have to claim. He looked back at her, eyebrows raised. This is not a real resume, he said bluntly, the businessman in him rising like instinct. But Hope didn't flinch. She stood there steady, her chin raised just a little higher. It's mine, she said. It's the truth. Vincent stared at the paper again, then down to the bottom. Under references, there was only one entry. Mom, the strongest person I know. Something about that line hit harder than he expected. There was no pretense here, no adult trying to impress, just a little girl who had written what she believed, a girl who somehow knew this was her only chance. He studied her face, unsure what to say. What exactly is this supposed to mean? Hope didn't answer that question. She just stood quietly, as if she knew it wasn't her turn to talk yet. Her eyes said everything, eyes that had seen too much, held too much. Vincent leaned back slowly in his chair, his gaze narrowing, though not in anger, in thought. She wasn't asking for a job. She wasn't selling anything. So why was she here? Why walk into a place like this, straight to the top, with nothing but a piece of paper and a heart full of something he couldn't yet name? There were no tears in her eyes, no trembling, just this quiet, calm conviction. He tapped the desk lightly with his fingers, a habit when processing something unexpected. Your mom worked here? He asked. Hope nodded. A long time ago, before she got sick. Vincent's thoughts flickered. He'd seen thousands of employee files, processed hundreds of layoffs over the years. It was possible her mother had been among them. A name, a number, lost in paperwork. He looked back at the resume. Night nurse to mom. That wasn't a job, it was a heartbreak. Dishwasher at Mama's Diner. That wasn't a title, it was survival. dreamer of big things. That wasn't a goal. It was a lifeline. Vincent felt something shift in his chest, something tight, like a door that had been locked for years was creaking open without his permission. This girl didn't belong in a boardroom, but at the same time, maybe she belonged here more than anyone he'd ever interviewed. He folded the paper again, this time gently. "You said you came for your mom," he repeated. Hope nodded. "And all you want is to say one sentence?" "Yes," she replied quietly. "Just one. To you." Vincent studied her for a long moment. The silence in the office stretched, not awkward but charged, like the air before a storm. He nodded once. "All right, say it." Hope stepped forward. Just a step, but it was enough to make her breath catch in her throat. For a moment her face softened. Her bottom lip trembled. Her eyes blinked too quickly, like she was pushing something back. But she held on. Vincent leaned in, instinctively knowing that whatever was coming next, it wasn't ordinary. And then, she spoke the sentence that made his heart stop. For a moment the room went silent. Not the silence of awkwardness, but the kind that wraps itself around your chest and refuses to let go. Hope took a shaky breath. Her lips parted, and the words that left her mouth carried the weight of something so personal, so raw. It didn't feel like a child speaking at all. "You fired my mom because of her name." The air went still. Vincent's fingers, which had been resting lightly on the edge of the resume, stiffened. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief. He couldn't have heard that right. "Excuse me?" he asked, voice lower, unsure. Hope's voice wavered, but her courage held. She looked up, tears clinging to her lashes, but her stare never left his. Her voice came out like a whisper made of steel. "Her name is Aaliyah Jackson. You laid her off 3 months ago. She worked in data entry. She was always early. She worked through her lunch breaks. She stayed late to help others catch up. But you still let her go." Vincent sat back, the chair creaking slightly under his weight. That name, Aaliyah Jackson, it sparked something in the fog of reports and spreadsheets that passed through his hands. He remembered approving a downsizing memo from HR, one of many. It had come with numbers and a list. He hadn't looked closely at the names. He trusted the data, trusted the department heads, trusted the system. "We were told the department was overstaffed," he said slowly, as if trying to justify it to himself more than to her. Hope didn't flinch. "She wasn't the only one let go," she said, her voice trembling now. "All 5 women had names that sounded black." That sentence dropped like a stone in a quiet lake. Ripples of guilt, of questions began to form in Vincent's mind. He suddenly remembered something. A conversation with HR, a mention of budget cuts, something about streamlining, efficiency, redundancy. But no one had said anything about patterns, about prejudice, about lives. He was a man of numbers, not names. And maybe that had been the problem all along. Hope stepped closer, her hands now fidgeting nervously in front of her. "She comes home and puts on a smile, but I hear her crying at night. I know she's scared, about bills, about finding another job, about people judging her before they even know her." Vincent felt a knot forming in his throat. He tried to look away, tried to find comfort in the logic of his spreadsheets, the safety of business language. But there was none here. Not when a little girl stood in front of him speaking truths his entire system was designed to ignore. "I told her not to cry," Hope continued, her voice shaking. "But she told me it's okay to cry and to never stop dreaming big. So, here I am." She said the last part with a small, proud lift of her chin, but her lower lip trembled as the tears finally fell. She wiped them away quickly, as if embarrassed, as if tears would make her look weak. But Vincent didn't see weakness. He saw something he hadn't seen in a long, long time. Courage wrapped in innocence. Truth wrapped in pain. He stared at her, speechless. There were no board meetings, no presentations, no quarterly earnings that could prepare him for this moment. This wasn't a shareholder problem. This wasn't a PR crisis. This was a human truth. He remembered his own mother, once a janitor, often ignored by the very suit she cleaned up after. He remembered how hard she worked to keep him fed, how many nights she cried when no one was watching. He hadn't thought about her in years. He swallowed hard. Your mom, Aaliyah, he said slowly, quietly. I didn't know. I didn't see her file. HR, they didn't mention this. Hope didn't blame him. Her face didn't accuse. It just hoped that maybe someone would finally listen. She's not mad at you, Hope whispered. She just misses the job. She loved working here. She said it made her feel proud, like she mattered. Vincent's hands opened slowly on the desk. He felt like the room was shrinking, like all his accomplishments meant little in this moment. What good were towers and titles if they stood on silent hurt? She sounds like an incredible woman, he said, voice rough now. She is, Hope replied. She's the strongest person I know. The same words from her resume. But now they weren't just typed lines. They were everything. Vincent didn't speak for a long moment. He looked at the folded resume again, the words written by a child not for attention or pity, but because she believed that maybe, just maybe, the truth could still matter in a world that often ignored it. So, Hope said gently, here I am. And with those 4 words, she finished her sentence. A sentence that cracked open the ice Vincent had kept around his heart for years. Vincent sat alone in his office after Hope left, her small footsteps echoing down the corridor long after she was gone. The resume still lay in front of him. His fingers rested lightly on its folded edge, as if it might burn him if he held on too tightly. His chest felt tight, but not from anger, from something deeper, something heavier. Shame. There had been a time he promised himself this company would be different, that Blackstone Industries wouldn't fall into the same traps as other giants. Discrimination, exploitation, coldness. He had fought to build something honest, but somewhere along the way, as profits soared and responsibilities multiplied, he had stopped looking too closely. He had trusted the machine, trusted the numbers, trusted that systems were smarter than bias. But the child's voice still echoed. All 5 women had names that sounded black. Vincent reached for the phone. Get HR. Now, he told his assistant, his voice low but firm. An hour later, 3 HR directors sat in front of him, clutching laptops and notes, nervously glancing at one another. No one spoke first. Vincent broke the silence. 3 months ago, we downsized the data entry department. I need full documentation. All emails, criteria, meeting notes, now. They hesitated. One opened a laptop, clicking furiously. Another tried to speak. Sir, the decision was based on performance and redundancy. No, Vincent cut in sharply. I want to see how you decided that. Show me the process. Show me the names. Show me everything. It didn't take long. 2 hours later, he sat alone again, but this time surrounded by the rot he never knew was there. The emails were coded in corporate politeness, but sickeningly clear. Comments like, she's hard to understand on calls, maybe not a good fit. Too much attitude, doesn't match company culture. Name makes it hard to connect with clients. Vincent's stomach churned. Even worse were the highlighted criteria. A manager had created an unofficial shortlist, based not on performance reviews, but on communication risk factors. It included names, accents, and vague descriptions of lack of cultural alignment. Aaliyah Jackson's name was at the top. Her reviews were strong. Her attendance was perfect. Her team feedback was positive. But next to her name, someone had written, sounds defensive, too assertive in tone. He couldn't believe what he was reading. This wasn't just oversight. This was bias, systematic, deliberate, and hidden beneath the surface like mold under paint. The more he read, the sicker he felt. A pattern emerged. Names associated with Black culture were disproportionately flagged for non-alignment. Staff with slight accents were marked as customer communication concerns. And promotions? Almost exclusively handed to those with neutral presentation, corporate speak for sounding and looking a certain way. He had unknowingly built a house that looked beautiful on the outside. Glass, steel, success. But its foundation was cracking. He rubbed his temples, eyes burning. This company bore his name. This culture bore his signature. And he had let it happen. He thought about Hope, the way she had walked in. No fear, only truth. She didn't bring protest signs. She didn't bring lawyers. She brought a resume scribbled in love and a sentence that changed everything. She had walked into his fortress of numbers, his empire of innovation, and cracked its cold armor with 4 words. "You fired my mom." Vincent stood and walked to the massive window. The skyline stretched out before him, towering buildings, a city buzzing with progress. But none of it felt like success anymore. Because somewhere, a mother was sitting at home, wondering how to keep her lights on, crying when her child wasn't watching, believing she wasn't good enough, because someone had looked at her name and made a decision without ever hearing her voice. He closed his eyes. His mother's voice came back to him from long ago. Tired, proud, worn from working 2 jobs just to make rent. Be better, Vincent. Not richer, better. And now a stranger's daughter had reminded him of that same truth. He turned from the window. No more silence. No more trusting systems over people. This company would change, not in words but in action. But first he had something more important to do. He looked at the resume again. He looked at the name written at the bottom. Mom, the strongest person I know. She had no LinkedIn profile, no Ivy League degree, but her daughter had walked into the most powerful office in the building, armed with nothing but truth, and reminded a CEO of what it meant to see people again. Vincent exhaled. She had walked into his empire of glass and steel, with nothing but truth. Can I offer you your job back? And a new position leading our diversity team? Morning sunlight poured across the marble floors of Blackstone Industries like it had every day. But this morning felt different. The building stood as tall as ever, but inside something had changed. A truth had been spoken, and now the world would hear it. Vincent Blackstone stood before a sea of reporters, flashing lights and live streaming cameras. He had done hundreds of press conferences in his career, announcing product launches, mergers, and billion-dollar partnerships. But today, he wasn't here to talk about success. Today, he was here to talk about failure. He adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began. There are moments in a company's history, he said slowly, that define more than its profits. They define its soul. The room fell silent. He continued. Recently, I learned of a painful mistake that was made under my watch. One rooted in bias, masked by policies, and cloaked in silence. His voice didn't shake, but it wasn't cold either. It held weight, the weight of someone who had seen the damage done. 5 women, all talented, hardworking, were let go, not because they failed us, but because we failed them, because their names didn't sound familiar enough, because their voices didn't match an idea of comfort. A murmur spread through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward. Staff members behind the cameras exchanged looks. Vincent didn't blink. I take full responsibility, not just as CEO, but as the person who built this company's values, and then forgot to protect them. He paused. Effective immediately, the managers responsible for those decisions have been dismissed. Gasps filled the room. Vincent went on. We are launching a new hiring protocol, blind application reviews, external equity audits, and quarterly transparency reports available to the public. People were scribbling furiously now, phones buzzing, news sites refreshing. But Vincent wasn't done. I am also proud to announce the launch of the Aliyah Fund, named after one of the women impacted. This fund will provide scholarships, mentorship, and legal support for victims of workplace discrimination across the country. He cleared his throat. This isn't charity. This is justice. The room burst into applause. Some journalists stood. Even his employees in the back clapped with tearful eyes. But Vincent's heart wasn't in the spotlight. It was already 3 miles away, in a modest apartment complex on the east side of the city. An hour later, Vincent stood outside a door marked 4B. The building was worn but clean. Kids' laughter echoed in the halls. Somewhere, someone was playing gospel music softly. He clutched a small folder in his hands. It contained 2 things, a formal apology and a job offer. He took a breath and knocked. The door opened slowly. A woman stood behind it, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing an oversized t-shirt and pajama pants. Her eyes widened when she saw him. She didn't speak, didn't move. Vincent removed his cap. "Miss Jackson, I'm Vincent Blackstone. I know who you are," she said quietly, arms folded protectively across her chest. Her voice was calm, not angry, but tired. Tired in the way only mothers know. Tired from proving herself again and again. Tired from being seen as less. Vincent nodded, humbled. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said, eyes beginning to mist. "Truly, deeply. Your daughter walked into my office yesterday and changed everything." Aaliyah's lips parted slightly. "Hope did what?" Vincent laughed gently through the lump in his throat. "She brought me a resume. It broke my heart and opened my eyes." He extended the folder. "I can't undo the hurt, but I can try to make it right. I'd like to offer you your job back, with full back pay. And not just that." She blinked, confused. "I want you to lead something new, a division focused on diversity, equity, and real change. You know better than anyone what it feels like to be overlooked. That makes you the most qualified person for the job." Aaliyah looked at him, not like a CEO, not like a stranger, but like a man trying to unlearn what power had taught him. She didn't cry. She didn't jump. She just slowly reached for the folder. Inside, her name was printed in bold, Director of Inclusion and Equity. And above it, in smaller handwriting, clearly added in pen, were the words, "Recommended by Hope." A soft laugh escaped her lips. "That girl," Vincent smiled, "that girl saved us both. Because sometimes the smallest voice can fix the loudest silence." Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the CEO's office, casting a warm glow on the walls of glass, metal, and ambition. But the brightest thing in the room wasn't the skyline view. It was a single framed sheet of paper, placed delicately behind glass, hung just above Vincent Blackstone's polished oak desk, was a resume, typed in bold, slightly wobbly font, dotted with hand-drawn stars. The line at the bottom still read, "Mom, the strongest person I know." People noticed it right away. Investors, journalists, new hires, global partners. Some would point at it and ask, "What is that doing here?" Vincent would smile softly, lean back in his chair, and answer, "That? That's the most important document this company owns." And when asked why, he would say the words he now lived by. "Because she reminded me that names carry stories, not statistics, and hearts see clearer than data." The framed resume stayed there, not as a decoration, but as a compass, a silent reminder that power doesn't live in titles, but in truth. A reminder that progress begins when we stop filtering people through comfort and start seeing them through compassion. Hope became a bit of a legend around the office. Her visits weren't often, but they were unforgettable. She would walk in with her small backpack, dragging a lunchbox behind her, wearing a grin that could melt steel. Sometimes she brought homemade cookies, carefully packed with notes that read, "For the people who believe in moms." Sometimes she'd just bring her curiosity, asking questions no one else dared to ask. Why are all the leaders in this meeting men? Why do people say, "Talk professional"? What does that even mean? Vincent would chuckle, but he'd listen, and then he'd change things. Because if a child could see what was wrong, how could the grown-ups pretend they didn't? Hope's presence sparked a quiet revolution. Hallways once filled with stiff suits and whispers now buzzed with life, laughter, and truth. The diversity office she inspired grew rapidly. Aaliyah Jackson, once silenced, now empowered, became a national speaker, sharing her story at universities, tech summits, and schools. She didn't speak with bitterness. She spoke with grace, the kind that doesn't erase pain, but turns it into purpose. Her message was always clear. Judge me by my work, not my accent. Respect me for my story, not your assumptions. People listened. Applications poured in from overlooked communities. Partnerships formed with grassroots organizations. The Aliyah Fund helped dozens of families restart their lives. Some earning degrees, some opening businesses, all carrying the courage that comes from being seen. Inside Blackstone Industries, changes rippled like waves. Job titles were degendered. Bias training became real, not rehearsed. Review panels were diverse by design, not by checkbox. Even the lunchroom changed. Menus added dishes inspired by the staff's cultures, and recipe cards shared the stories behind the meals. And Vincent? He changed most of all. He no longer introduced himself with numbers or titles. He introduced himself with a story. Sometimes after meetings, he'd walk by the framed resume and whisper, "Thank you." Not because it reminded him of guilt, but because it reminded him of grace. Hope never bragged about what she did. She just said, "I told the truth." And truth, as it turned out, wasn't loud. It was small, simple, unapologetic, and powerful enough to shake an empire. One winter morning, a group of college interns toured the office. They paused in front of the frame. One whispered, "This resume? It's from a kid?" Vincent, passing by, nodded. He smiled, and he said the line he'd now memorized, not because it was rehearsed, but because it was real. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the smallest voice can fix the loudest silence."